Hey everyone, and welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to try to unpack a day that honestly felt like the whole world was holding its breath. January 17th, 2025. From a pivotal ceasefire to a controversial social media ban, and even a presidential record. We're going to be breaking down the why behind the headlines and uncovering the connections you might have missed.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how all these events we're going to talk about today, how they're actually intertwined and they kind of reflect the complex challenges and opportunities we face in the world today.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into it. Let's start with what's undeniably the biggest story of the day, that fragile ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas after 15 months of really intense conflict. Is this a genuine step towards peace or just a temporary pause?
Oh, it's definitely a crucial moment. This initial 42-day period is going to be a real litmus test. We're talking about a complete ceasefire, the release of 33 Israeli hostages with vulnerable groups being prioritized, a prisoner exchange involving 1,000 Gazans and hundreds of Palestinians, and a surge in humanitarian aid.
That's a lot riding on these next few weeks. Some reports are even calling this a moment of no return. What's the general feeling on the ground?
There's definitely a mix of emotions. You've got cautious optimism from those who have been longing for peace, but also deep skepticism. Given the long history of conflict there, many are pointing out the complexities and concerns about whether both sides can actually deliver on this initial agreement.
Right. It makes you wonder if the ceasefire is just the first step in what could be a very, very long and complex process. What happens after these initial 42 days?
That's where it gets really interesting. Phase 2 is all about tackling those even tougher questions, negotiating for the remaining hostages, reaching a lasting ceasefire agreement, figuring out the logistics of a full Israeli withdrawal, and then the big one, the future of the Philadelphia corridor. Not to mention the potential for a really, really complicated terrorist exchange.
Wow, corridor is a bit of a mystery to me. What's its significance in all this?
Well, it's a narrow strip of land between Gaza and Egypt that's been a major point of contention. Control of the corridor is key for security, but it also impacts the flow of goods and people in and out of Gaza. It's a microcosm of the larger conflict in many ways.
Okay, so we've got geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. And now let's shift gears a little bit to another story with incredibly high stakes, the U.S. Supreme Court's decision on TikTok.
Yeah, this is a landmark decision with potential ripple effects far beyond the app itself. The court unanimously upheld a law that essentially forces ByteDance to sell TikTok by January 19th. That's just 2 days from now, or face a ban in the U.S.
So is this a justified measure to protect national security? Or are we stepping into dangerous territory when it comes to online censorship? What's the main concern here?
Well, the law was passed due to anxieties over potential data access by the Chinese government. But it raises big questions about the balance between national security and freedom of speech in the digital age. And practically speaking, it means app stores and hosting services can no longer offer TikTok. No new downloads, no updates, which will eventually make the app unusable for millions of Americans.
That's a massive impact. I imagine this decision has sparked some pretty heated debate. What are people saying about it?
Definitely. You have those who applaud it as a necessary step to safeguard sensitive data and protect national security, but there's a strong contingent who view it as government overreach. They're worried about the precedent this sets for controlling online platforms and whether it could stifle innovation and limit free expression.
It's interesting how students at Dartmouth are reflecting these wider concerns. Some are even worried about losing access to something that brings them joy and connects them to others.
Absolutely. Their perspectives highlight the real human impact of this decision. For many, TikTok isn't just an app, it's a source of entertainment, a way to express themselves creatively, and a vital tool for building community.
So it's not just about data and security. It's about how we define the boundaries of online freedom and the role of social media in our lives. This Supreme Court decision is a pivotal moment in that conversation.
You know what? It actually ties in with our next topic, President Biden breaking a record, but not the kind you might expect.
Right. He's issued more presidential pardons and commutations than any other president in history, over 4,000. Mostly for nonviolent drug offenders who successfully reintegrated into society after being placed on home confinement during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, that's pretty surprising. It's not every day you hear about a president breaking a record for clemency. What's the motivation behind this move? Is it purely about compassion, or is there a political strategy at play here? That's the million-dollar question. Some see it as a powerful final act before leaving office, a way for Biden to solidify his legacy and make a statement about criminal justice reform. It's a bold move and one that has generated both praise and criticism.
I'm curious to hear the criticisms. Why would anyone be against giving people a second chance?
Mm-hmm.
Especially those who have already proven they can turn their lives around.
Well, some argue that while the intention might be good mass, clemency can undermine the judicial process and potentially create a perception of leniency towards certain types of crime. There's also the question of whether this was a strategic move given the incoming Trump administration. Was it a way to contrast his approach to criminal justice with what we might see from the new president?
Interesting. It's almost like he's preemptively addressing potential actions by the new administration.
And that brings us to, wait, before we move on, I think it's important to connect this back to our earlier discussions about the ceasefire and TikTok. These seemingly disparate events all touch upon themes of power control and individual freedom.
You're right. Whether it's governments negotiating peace courts, regulating technology, or presidents granting clemency, it's all about navigating those complex tensions between individual rights and collective security.
Exactly. And it's those very tensions that are shaping our world in profound ways. It makes you think about how these events will be remembered and what their long-term impact will be.
That's a great point. And you know what? That's a perfect place to pause for a moment. Don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we're diving into a rapid-fire roundup of other global developments you need to know about. Plus, we've got a bizarre news of the day that you won't want to miss. Stay tuned. Hashtag TTS The Deep Dive Episode 2025-0117, Part 2 of 3.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's shift our focus now to some of the other major developments happening around the world. As we've seen, today is a day where seemingly disparate events are echoing similar themes.
You're absolutely right. It's like we're seeing different pieces of a global puzzle coming together. So let's start with a development that has a lot of people feeling anxious. The new partnership treaty between Russia and Iran.
Yeah, this alliance has the potential to be a real game changer, especially considering the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the delicate balance of power in the Middle East. It's raising concerns about increased military cooperation, potential for economic sanctions evasion, and even the possibility of further destabilization in the region.
So this is something we definitely need to keep a close eye on. What does it mean for the U.S. and its allies?
It's definitely a cause for concern. The West is already wary of Russia's actions in Ukraine, and Iran's involvement could escalate tensions even further. There's a lot of speculation right now about what this partnership means for global security and the potential for increased conflict.
There's a lot to process.
Oh.
Okay, let's move on to a different kind of challenge. The economic picture in China, they're reporting 5% growth, but we're also hearing about persistent job concerns.
It's a classic case of the good news and the bad news. On the surface, 5% growth seems positive, but for a country with China's massive population, they need to create a huge number of jobs to keep pace. It's a balancing act, and it's causing some anxiety for both Chinese leaders and the global economy as a whole.
So it sounds like economic uncertainty is another theme for the day. Speaking of uncertainty, let's talk about the weather. U.S. listeners, brace yourselves, because a polar vortex is about to descend, bringing potentially life-threatening temperatures.
It's no joke, folks. Over 300 million Americans are in the path of this Arctic blast, and some areas could see wind chills as low as -50 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the kind of cold that can be dangerous, even deadly, if you're not careful.
So if you're in the affected area, please take this seriously. Stay indoors, bundle up, and check on your neighbors, especially those who might be more vulnerable to the cold. And while we're talking about people we need to check on, let's send some well wishes to Pope Francis, who unfortunately suffered another fall.
This is his second fall in just 6 weeks. And at 88 years old, it's understandably raising concerns about his health and ability to continue his duties. He's a beloved figure, and many are worried about what these falls might mean for his future as the leader of the Catholic Church.
Let's hope for a speedy recovery. And now some news from Washington, D.C. An Indian national has been sentenced for the attempted White House attack.
Right. He received an 8-year prison sentence. The details of the attack itself are still shrouded in secrecy, and we don't know much about his motivations. But this case highlights the persistent security concerns around government buildings, especially in a world where the threat of lone wolf attacks seems to be on the rise.
It's a stark reminder that vigilance is crucial, even amidst all the other events happening on the world stage. But let's end this segment on a high note. NASA astronaut Sunita Williams has achieved a major milestone after 7 months in orbit.
Absolutely. She's successfully completed a spacewalk to perform critical maintenance and upgrades on the International Space Station. This is not only a testament to her incredible skill and dedication, but also a reminder of the amazing things humans can achieve when we work together pushing the boundaries of exploration and scientific discovery.
Okay, back down to earth, literally. We mentioned the incoming Trump administration earlier, and it looks like his inauguration ceremony had to be moved indoors, thanks to that polar vortex we just talked about.
The Capitol Rotunda will have to do, it might be a bit less grand than the usual outdoor ceremony, but probably a lot more comfortable for everyone involved given the freezing temperatures.
I'd say so. And finally, an update on the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles.
Thankfully, firefighters are making good progress in containing the blaze. The winds have died down, which is a huge help, but sadly the damage is already done. We're talking about at least 27 lives lost and widespread destruction across the region.
It's heartbreaking. It really underscores the power of nature and the importance of preparedness.
It also makes you think about how these natural disasters are becoming more frequent and more intense and the impact that climate change is having on our world. It's a sobering thought.
It is. And that brings us to something a little lighter, but equally fascinating. You ready for the bizarre news of the day?
Oh, I'm always up for a little bit of the bizarre. What do you have for us?
A Swedish student traveled all the way to Ireland to meet her doppelganger.
Wait, really? Like someone who looks exactly like her? That's incredible. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2025-01-17, part 3 of 3.
It sounds like something out of a movie, right?
Aye.
But it actually happened. And it makes you wonder, in a world of billions of people, what are the chances?
Yeah, it really is kind of wild. It's a good reminder that even in the midst of all the global events and serious news, there's still room for these unexpected, whimsical moments. And in a way, it ties back to what we've been talking about all episode, interconnectedness. Even if it's not always obvious, we're all connected in some way, and sometimes those connections can really surprise us.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about a fragile ceasefire in the Middle East, a controversial social media ban, a president making a statement with clemency, a new global power dynamic, a polar vortex, a pope's health, a spacewalk, and even doppelgangers in Ireland.
It's been a whirlwind, hasn't it? But I think what stands out to me is how all these events, as different as they seem, they're all raising similar questions about the forces that are shaping our world today. We're seeing these tensions between security and freedom playing out in different arenas, from international relations to technology to individual rights.
It makes you realize that everything is connected, and the choices we make today will have ripple effects for years to come.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to engage with these issues, and to think critically about the information that we're consuming. We can't just be passive observers. We have to be active participants in shaping the future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into January 17th, 2025, we want to leave you with this final thought. Which of the events that you discussed today do you think will have the most significant impact on your life?
And as you go about your day, consider this. What role do you want to play in navigating these complex challenges and shaping the world around you?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.